Welcome to the Two Button Crew Podcast, episode 31, Metroid Dread. My name is Scott, and I'm pleased to be joined with my co-host as usual. How's it going?
It's going well. If you're new here, I'm Glen.
I don't think I've been this excited to record a podcast in a long time, barring like special interviews with the Torontos or different authors I've talked to, but just like doing a topic. This is incredible. I can't believe I'm saying the words Metroid Dread, and it's a real game. It exists. It's on store shelves. You can download it, and it finally came out.
Yeah. Like when they revealed that it was going to be called Metroid Dread, okay, so I may have mentioned this before in past podcasts, but I have this habit of like when I'm just completely overwhelmed, I start laughing like a madman.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh my gosh, it's freaking Metroid Dread. Like,
yep.
I can't believe that that's actually real. I have to wonder if they like chose that name. Like, so for those of you who don't know, Metroid Dread has been rumored since the days of the Nintendo DS.
Right.
So like 2004. It's been over a decade that name has been floating around. And I have to wonder if they chose that name because of the rumors or if that was always the name that they were going to go with. And the
name was like printed on materials given to press E3 2004, the first time the game was in development. I think that even though this iteration is actually the third time they tried developing Metroid Dread, I think they stuck with the name rather than changing it because of its historical significance to the most hardcore of Nintendo fans.
Yeah. Okay, so you said third time. I have not really watched any of the developer stuff because apparently some of Nintendo's... I know Arlo talked about this. If you haven't, check out Arlo. He's got a really cool channel.
Yeah. And by the way, his reaction to Metroid Dread was priceless.
Yeah. He warned that some of Nintendo's promotional material would spoil stuff. So I didn't watch most of that stuff because I wanted to go in as blind as possible.
Yeah. The Sakamoto, the director of the series, he admitted that this is Metroid Dread, the one that was rumored for the longest time, and that it did exist back in 2004. It was canceled. They tried developing it again around 2007 after some new hardware had come out, and both times
the Wii?
I think it was whatever the newest iteration of the handheld was.
Well, in 2007, like, the Wii came out in 2006, and the DS was, like, 2004, so new hardware at the time would have been the Wii if it was 2007.
When did DSi come out?
DSi, DSi, that actually, okay. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
So, well, maybe the years aren't exactly right, but the point is that they tried developing it two separate times in the past, and both times felt that the technology just wasn't able to keep up with their vision. So it was canceled twice until this iteration that finally came out. Third time's a charm. I feel very rewarded as a Nintendo fan for reading news and rumors and just being so dedicated to the point where like I held on to hope that Metroid Dread would eventually come out. Simeon and I made a video about it a good 4 years ago. It was called Metroid Dread, Tragic History plus New Info because we actually went digging a bit. I tweeted some people that were at E3 in 2004 and confirmed some of those rumors that had not been confirmed prior. So it was funny when Metroid Dread was officially announced at E3 this year, that video from 4 years ago got some more traffic and people were like, whoa, they knew about this. Where were you during E3 this last time? I was at a camp with hardly any internet, so I was like trying to watch the stream, but it was really choppy. I hopped on, I saw Metroid 5 and then Metroid Dread, and it just blew my mind. I was like, I have to wait until I have a steady stream so I can watch this trailer.
Well, I want to say that I think E3 was like scheduled very conveniently for me this year because it was like 12 o'clock Central, which is typically when I take my lunch break. So it's just like, oh, hey, I can just watch E3 over my lunch break.
So, Glenn, tell us another reason that this is so significant, not just because this particular game has been rumored for so long, but just in regards to the series as a whole.
Oh, yeah. So, there's a few reasons. First and foremost, the last game in the timeline officially prior to this was Metroid Fusion, which came out in 2002, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 19 years ago.
So, it's been 19 years since we've seen what happens next in the story, which is pretty nuts. So and Metroid 4, Metroid Fusion, ended on a pretty, I wouldn't say a cliffhanger, but it definitely was a situation where it's like, okay, where's the story go from here? But the other thing is that we haven't had a new Metroid game since, a new 2D Metroid game, I should say, a new 2D side-scrolling Metroid game that wasn't a remake since that. You know, we had Samus Returns, which was good, and we have an episode of the podcast on that if you want to hear our thoughts on it. And we had Zero Mission, which was also our last episode of the podcast, so you can go hear our thoughts on that. But yeah, we haven't had like a whole cloth new 2D Metroid game since Fusion, so and you know, that's kind of a big part of, you know, that's where Metroid started. So it was you know, it's kind of like the gap between Super Mario World and New Super Mario Brothers.
Right. It's so interesting seeing the difference between some of these Nintendo directors. Like Sakamoto and Miyamoto are just completely different in the storytelling department, because Sakamoto gives Metroid this long-running lore that's actually continuous, whereas nobody's sitting around thinking, what happens next to the saga of Mario and Bowser? More than likely, it's just going to be a repeat of the same story beats. And then Aonuma is in the middle a little bit, where there is a timeline and there's some continuity between some Zelda games, but whatever game is going to come out could just be anywhere in the timeline, any iteration of the hero reincarnating. So Metroid is very different from all other Nintendo series, where there's actually a continuous story, and we were left waiting, knowing that there had to be something after Metroid Fusion for so long. So they actually pitched this game as the conclusion to a 5-game arc that started 35 years ago with the original Metroid on NES. And they said this is going to be kind of a closing chapter for the Metroid saga, 2D at least. So I thought that was a great way to build hype for the game. They definitely put a ton into the marketing. I know you were a little skeptical even after the game was released that this would actually be the sequential sequel, right? You're finding it hard to believe, I think.
Yeah, well, I wrote about this in the past on the blog. Man, I'm just plugging a ton of stuff today. But I was a little skeptical that Nintendo would continue it, because the way I saw the end of Fusion is that kind of put Samus at odds with the Galactic Federation, which is who hires Samus in pretty much every Metroid game. So I was a little bit skeptical that they actually would continue the story, because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, Samus has a new suit, and there's kind of this shake up to the continuity, and Nintendo seems really committed to sort of the Super Metroid kind of concept of Samus and the series' identity.
And speaking of story, I think almost everyone listening to this episode will have beaten the game, but rest assured, if you're still playing through or if you have yet to start, we will hold off on spoilers until towards the end, and we'll give you a warning. So first, we will talk about some of the things that won't spoil the game for you, like the gameplay and the aesthetics. We will have to talk about all of the abilities, so if that bothers you, maybe just pause the podcast and come back to it after you've beaten the game. But we will hold off on the actual
if you haven't started
beats.
yet, it's not a very long game. It took me like, I think it said that my playthrough was like 12 and a half hours. Though I think it may only count the amount of time that I actually successfully completed. So all those times you get killed might not count to your end total.
And being on the map screen pauses the counter. So
really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a nice feature.
Yeah. It's good for speedrunners. you can also restart from the last checkpoint, and that will shave off whatever time you didn't use. So this game is pretty heavy in the speedrunning department. And when I beat the game and saw some of those achievements you could go for, like beat it on hard under 4 hours, I was just like, what? No way. That's so fast, but people are doing it. All right, let's get into the gameplay, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay. What do you think of the very basics of the gameplay?
I think they really nailed the basics. Like the controls. Oh my gosh, the controls in this game are so good. Like Samus is very fluid in her movement. Like, you know, here's the thing: is like we think of Samus as an acrobatic character because she does somersaults and stuff in the games, but really, like most Metroid games have pretty heavy controls.
Right, especially if you go back to them.
Yeah, and I guess the exception would be Super, which has very floaty controls. But, you know, Samus always is, like, there isn't a huge emphasis on, like, quick acrobatics. Samus actually has kind of a plodding sort of movement. Which, you know, works for an exploration-based game, I suppose. But, yeah, the controls in this game were really, really good. Like, you can just keep moving in one direction. You know, there are little things like Samus will automatically roll into a morph ball if you, like, go up to a narrow opening and press the A button. She'll just climb in. Mm-hmm. And, like, there's a little animation for that. There's animations for her, like, stepping over short, like, knee-high steps and stuff like that. So the game really lets you just keep moving.
Did you notice the animation when you walk up to a wall that you can kind of see through a crack? And Samus, if you press forward, she'll place her hand up on the wall.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
Honestly, I think she does that with all walls. Sometimes when I would get frustrated, I just walk up to a wall and I would, like, press that over and over again. It kind of looks like she's beating her head against the wall. But
that's great.
Yeah. Oh, other things like so you can automatically go into Morph Ball several times, and there's a slide maneuver that you can do that allows you to slide into gaps, which allows you to keep your momentum. And then if you're still in that gap, you'll automatically go into a morph ball. But the game also keeps track of when you automatically jump into a morph ball. So that the second you leave that gap and there's just enough room for Samus to stand up, she will.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's a really cool feature. And I really appreciate that. For me, it was a little hard to get used to because I'm an old school fan, so I'm used to just having to do that manually. But once you get used to that, you can just like zip around all over the place.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you about the movement. Samus felt great. It kind of seemed like an evolution of Other M, where there was that emphasis on acrobatics and fast dodges and stuff like that. But of course, that game was controlled with a D-pad. So this felt much smoother when her fast movements and abilities were mapped onto analog controls and played in a 2D plane. So I enjoyed that a lot. With controls, I found myself getting the feeling that too many buttons were needed in certain parts. Like when it comes to aiming and missiles, I could get confused with like which shoulder buttons to use when.
Yeah, that definitely was an issue for me, especially whenever the grapple beam came into play.
Right.
I definitely had trouble with that, and I will admit this is an issue I had with, and this is not so much controls, but like the free aiming. A part of me still kind of likes the just regular old diagonal aiming from like the Fusion and Fusion and Zero Mission, because the diagonal, like when it's a grid-based game, it's a lot easier to just sort of line up your shots, even if you don't have the same. You can't like aim in 360 degrees. You know, your brain just kind of adjusts to that very quickly. Mm-hmm. So, I admit that there were some aspects of that, especially when it comes to the shoulder buttons. And it's just like, which of these do I press to do the thing I want?
And I've heard other commentators say that that kind of puts you in Samus's shoes, so to speak, and you're feeling some of that tension and dread that she feels in intense battles. So it's like, sure, that could be a fine explanation.
Yeah, I guess. I would assume that she has a slightly better interface for all of that, but
She probably does. And she does seem to keep her cool a lot. Like you can tell with some of her animations, such as charging her charge beam without aiming at an enemy. It's like, whoa, she is calm, cool, collected.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, controls are really good. Like you said, I would say there are a few points where it does get a little bit cluttered and the game does ask you to do a lot of things in quick succession. So that probably would be the biggest issue, but otherwise it controls like a dream.
Let's talk about the combat, because I feel like that's tied into the controls. Because I think when you are feeling overwhelmed by all the controls and you're in a fight, you may die, and that's okay, because I think this game is really good at and really emphasizes teaching you patterns and having you learn how to beat a boss through trial and error. So to me, the boss battles felt very Mega Man X-ish. Like you have to learn their patterns, and just as important as hitting the boss is avoiding getting hit. And that's a very Mega Man trait. So I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, combat is very different in this game. So if you played previous Metroid games, because they are just like slower and less snappy in how they control, the combat is very different. And so, also Samus has like a dodge move that you can use. And if you get good at that, you know, I don't know, it feels much more like an action game, especially in boss battles. Enemies also hit really hard in this game. You know, so here's an interesting thing I noticed is that the balance is different because of the checkpoints. Like old Metroid games, you die, you go back to a save point, and sometimes that save point's not near a boss. And so what they would do is they make it so that enemies do less damage, or you have more health. I think you only get like 10 energy tanks in this game total. So combat's a lot more brutal in this game, but it's a lot easier to hop back into. And I found that to be kind of an interesting symbiotic relationship between how different design elements affect each other. It's like, oh, you know, you get a checkpoint to right before you enter the boss battle, so we can hit you harder and we can focus more on teaching you to learn the pattern instead of this kind of idea of, no, you should be able to get it on your first try. If you're really paying attention.
What did you think of countering? Because that was always a big part, like weakening the boss to the point where they'd throw out a big move that you could counter if you're fast enough.
So in general, I think that countering was de-emphasized over what it was in Samus Returns. So this returns from Samus Returns, the countering maneuver, and I think the countering maneuver was a little overbearing in that game. I think it's much more balanced here. So first of all, I want to say that there are places where you do need to use it. Like you just can't win the fight without using it. But yeah, I think it was much better implemented here. There are still a lot of places where it's just easier to sit there and wait for the enemy to try to attack you than it is to try to take down the enemy on your own. And that's another thing, is like I feel like mostly like the enemies for most of the game are kind of damage sponges here. And that's one of the things in regards to combat that I don't really appreciate in the I don't know, I feel like I should be able to take down an enemy with a couple of, like a basic enemy with a couple of not charged shots, a couple of uncharged shots, but here you can like pump a regular enemy full of missiles.
Yep, and it's not really until you come back with the signature screw attack that is at the end of most Metroid games that you can just tear through everyone. But for sure, it takes a while. Especially, I remember some of those metal enemies, like the one that spreads fire on both sides, which is also a very Mega Man design, by the way. But you had to wait until you got like some kind of beam 3/4 through the game to even like feel like you could beat those. It was
it's
plasma
crazy. Beam. Those things are actually really easy to counter, though, if you know what you're doing. But
Oh, I don't know if I ever countered one.
yeah, and that's the thing is you get really reliant on the counter by the end of the game. So, well, okay, by the end of the game you have like the screw attack and all that, so you don't really need the counter unless you just need the health pickups.
Okay, so we've talked about the normal enemies and the bosses, with the exception of E.M.M.I. So let's talk about those. Definitely huge in the marketing of Metroid Dread, and there's 7 of them on the cover. In lots of the trailers, it felt like the E.M.M.Is would be the driving force of the title of this game, the main thing causing the dread. And I think they do play that up. My main concern going into Metroid Dread was that the E.M.M.Is would be too annoying, that there would be too many of them, that you'd always be running from them, that you would be distracted from exploring the world or doing the typical Metroidvania exercise of unlocking new areas because of trying to avoid these guys. I was very pleasantly surprised when they were relegated to their own E.M.M.I zones where they're confined to. So that was so smart. I'm really glad they did it because it took care of my biggest concern going into the game. So I enjoyed those areas. I like how they are very puzzly, and you had to find ways to use your abilities and avoid these guys. There's a very small chance that you can counter them if they catch you, which I probably pulled off about 10 times the whole game. What about you?
Like 2 or 3.
Oh, all right.
It's only on that last one, which I've heard people speculate that that last one has a broader window.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think of E.M.M.Is overall?
So I was like you. I had a lot of concerns going in, and especially hearing that they were inspired by the Zero Suit segment from Zero Mission, because I was not I was not particularly thrilled by that segment. I found it stressful, and to be fair, again, I said this in the last episode. I don't hate the Zero Suit segment. I think it's a fine set piece, but it's I'm glad it's relegated to like a 30-minute to 1 hour segment of gameplay. But the E.M.M.Is, so I'm glad they were relegated to their own area. But when I first started playing, I remember getting to those and seeing that there is no way to get to my next destination except to go through an E.M.M.I area. It'd be like, you know what? Now's a good time for a bathroom break. Early on, but I think they relegate them to their own areas, which was clever. But I think the other thing is the first one, it's very brief encounter, and it's broken down, so it's not really much of a threat. But the first one, they teach you very early on, by the way, you're going to kill these things. And that's something I really appreciate, is that you do get to take care of them eventually. And that feels really good. Like, I was like pumping my fist and going, yeah, eat it. After that.
I know. And it's so nice to know that they don't respawn, they don't come back. Like, it's off the map for good.
Uh-huh. And like the little color of the E.M.M.I area on the map actually changes. Once you do that, it's to kind of signify, hey, that's done. And they have a counter telling you where all of them are. But yeah, so I appreciate the fact that they communicate that very early on. So it did take a lot of the edge off. But I remember that first one, I absolutely... I found that very stressful because it was mostly just like, okay, I have to think very quickly, and I'm having to run, and I don't want this thing to see me because then I'm not going to be able to leave without having to shake it first, and I don't really know how long that's going to take. And there were many times where I'd go in and like I'd see the little yellow circle, and that shows like it's how far it can hear, and I would walk. Accidentally step in that, and I just dash for the exit. It's like, no, I'm not even doing this. Reset, do over, taking a mulligan.
It's really nice that you're able to do that, and that if you die, they restart you at the last E.M.M.I door you went through, rather than your last save station.
Getting caught really is not the worst thing in the world. It's just a little bit irritating because the reset is very quick. Now, here's the thing, though. So I did not like that first one at all. I remember thinking, oh, gosh, this whole game is going to be terrible. And then, shortly after, well, I say the first one, really it's the second one, the first real one. The second one, it's like, oh gosh, this is going to be awful. This is just going to, this is going to be the whole game, and they're going to force me to do this. And then you get the stealth ability. And that completely changed it. It's like, oh, you know what? This isn't so bad now. Like, it's weird, that one power up where it's just like, okay, you just find a little corner where the thing's not going to go patrolling and you just hide. And, you're good. You just have to figure out, and, there is a waiting game, and it's sort of like, okay, am I going to run out of power before this thing leaves the room, or is it looks like it's patrol patterns, or it's not going as far away as I would like it to, so I'm going to have, probably it's going to hear me, I just have to make sure it doesn't see me, stuff like that. So
it was fun to take screenshots when they're like 1 inch away from you.
Yeah, but the thing is that ultimately it turned into, it did make it more puzzle-like once you have the invisibility thing. So if you're playing the game and you're not really liking E.M.M.I in the first area, don't worry, it gets a lot better. Yeah, and like it does lead to moments where I remember you can't turn the stealth suit back on after you deactivate until it's fully charged again, even if you only use it a little bit. I remember, like, one of my earliest experiences using that is, like, I turned it off and then the E.M.M.I jumped down as soon as I turned it off and I was like, oh, crap. And it just walked the other way.
Oh, wow.
It's like something out of a movie.
It was very puzzle-like, especially when you got the Omega Cannon and you get to go back through the area and then discover, oh, this area is perfectly laid out for the length that I will need to blast this guy's faceplate off before he reaches me. And just fun how they use the environment to make it a really good cat and mouse game.
Yeah, and those fights were interesting because it's like you start really thinking about the layout of the room, and it's like, okay, what is going to slow it down enough that I can blast it.
All right, quick E.M.M.I spoiler here, about 30 seconds. Did you get to that part where it usually comes to you across the ceiling and you're like shooting the faceplate off, and then after the faceplate is off, you wait for it to come back again and it actually comes up behind you?
No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay. I thought that was amazing. So we're going to start talking about the progression through this game and the different abilities that you can get. But a way that ties into what we were just talking about with the E.M.M.I robots is, I gotta say, I never quite figured out when you would get an ability. Sometimes you would stumble on a Chozo room. Sometimes you would beat an E.M.M.I and it would give you something. There's also like natural kind of environmental boss battles that you go through. And there are also sometimes when I would beat a boss and think, I'm about to get a big upgrade because that was a really hard fight. And then you just don't. So they kind of spread out through a lot of different ways how you progress the game and are rewarded with power-ups, but I never figured out when to expect them.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that it was a little bit weird. And I don't know, I started with Fusion and Prime, and Fusion and Prime train you to think, oh, I get these abilities after beating a boss. Yep. That's how that works. But if you look at the older Metroid games, it's like you just find it lying around, and maybe there's a boss somewhere near it, and some of them, but you just find the abilities lying around. So it's
much more in that vein.
Yeah, it's much more in the vein of the older games. Like, you definitely get rewarded for fighting certain bosses. You have to fight a boss to get the stealth ability, and they kind of explain why that is, but it's weird. So yeah, definitely it's hard to predict when you get stuff. Also, like, something I really appreciate is they play around with the order that you get stuff in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would say towards the middle of the game, and definitely towards the end, it typically follows the normal Metroid progression pattern. But that early game, like, there's a lot of times where you're getting stuff and it's like, really? That's what I get before this? Right. For instance, you go, like, I think it was probably an hour and a half before I got the Morph Ball.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the Morph Ball is not in the first area.
Stark contrast to Metroid 1, where you walk left and get the Morph Ball.
Yeah, it's literally just sitting there, one screen to the left. But, yeah, the Morph Ball, like, I remember thinking that was really clever because it really makes you appreciate how reliant Metroid's design is on the Morph Ball, and I don't know. It was a very clever decision to do that.
Yep.
Especially since you have the slide move, so you can go through short segments pretty easily. You can slide through some gaps, but you can't like climb into a gap or whatever. Because Metroid can't crawl.
Right. Yeah, there are so many abilities in this game. I really like them all. They made really great use of the Speed Boost and Shine Spark, of course. Tons of puzzles related to those. And I don't know, I think one of the main challenges is just remembering everything that you have and making good use of it.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that kind of forgot about turning invisible, so I was more trying to brute force all the E.M.M.I encounters and just keep dying repeatedly until I get the one run that works. But if you remember to turn invisible and use the dash during fights, I love that aerial dash where you can go 3 sections at once.
Yeah, you're very rarely going to go more than 2 because the third one is typically it's not big enough for that. But yeah, absolutely.
So here's one ability that I totally predicted would come towards the end of the game and never did. The ability to use that dash through solid objects and get from one side of a wall to another. I would love that. They should add that as DLC.
I don't think this game's getting DLC, but...
I know. Man, that would be...
So here's the problem with that, is that if you go out of bounds for like more than 1 frame in the game, you die. Like the game just... That's how they handle out of bounds glitches, is they just kill you outright. So it'd be really... they'd have to finagle a solution for that.
Yeah. And with this game's emphasis on speedrunning, that would just take it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, one of the things I found interesting about power-ups is, one, pretty much every power-up, every ability you get is tied to progression, which I found interesting. Some more so than others.
So you mean it doesn't just make you better at combat, you need it to get through a door or something?
Yeah, like the charge beam for most Metroid games is really just a convenience feature. And here they have charge beam doors. And then they have like plasma beam doors and stuff like that. And I found that to be really interesting because you typically don't see that in Metroid games. Sometimes you need it to break a certain block or defeat a certain kind of enemy or whatever. But here I feel like they were much more conscientious about making sure everything contributed to progression.
Right.
The other thing is that power-ups were a lot more granular in nature. Like you get basically a double somersault before you get the space jump.
Yep. Which is, it made it to where there were so many, you'd be getting a new ability at every turn. So a very tight breadcrumb to kind of guide you through the game. You mentioned charge beam doors, which just reminded me of the map. And boy, this map is dense. There are several areas, but when you're in an area and pull up the map, it has so much detail. Shows you what kind of blocks there are, what kind of doors there are, and what kind of barricades there are in front of doors. And it's all available on the map. So I think this is definitely the most developed and detailed map in any Metroid game.
Oh yeah,
right?
Like the map is, again, that's another part of the game that's just absolutely amazing, and it's going to make it hard to go back to older Metroid games because, like, the map, you can see an obstacle and it's like, do I know what destroys this yet? No. Because it'll tell you, I don't know what kind of block this is. And it's like, oh, okay. So I guess I'll just, I'll come back later. And you can just look that up on the map. Where in old Metroid games, it's like, okay, I remember there was a power up here. But I don't remember what was impeding my ability to collect it. So should I go back and try to get it? And you go back and you realize, oh, wait, no, this needs power bombs. So I'm not going to be able to do this until later in the game or whatever. And so you spend a lot of time kind of running around in circles going, wait, is it time for me to get this thing? Because I know that there's a power up here. I can see it on my map, but I haven't collected it, and I don't remember why.
Yep. There was kind of an unnecessary feature of your ability to drop your own different colored markers, and I just didn't find a use for that because the map had everything there is to know about the map. I did see someone on Reddit say you can just drop a marker to remind yourself in which direction you're going. If you're going to save the game, turn it off and come back at a later time. Yeah. So that was helpful, but you only
used it to mark where power-ups that I hadn't collected were, because this is like my one complaint about the map, is that it makes it very hard to find which power-ups you haven't collected, because they like kind of make them more transparent, but it's hard to pick up. And with everything that is on the map, it's hard to pick out which ones are power-ups and which ones are like teleporters and stuff.
Yeah, that's related to my complaint with the map, and that is...
like a filter where I could say, just show me the pickups would have been really nice.
I would love the ability to just toggle off power-ups that I have picked up. Mm-hmm. Because, like you said, they didn't look that different than power-ups that you still needed to get. So it became cluttered, especially if you zoomed out. I kept looking for the toggle. Where can I turn off things I've already picked up? And I could see that getting patched in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, or in Metroid 6.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about, as you're going through this game, how linear versus open it is, because I feel like there's some good discussion to be had here. Metroidvania is known for a lot of backtracking, searching, getting power up, and then, like you said, where can I use this power up? Don't really feel like that was a major component of Metroid Dread. I think that the developers really intentionally funneled you through a path while trying to obfuscate the fact that they're doing it.
Yeah, they didn't do a very good job of obfuscating it. So here's the interesting thing, is that it kind of embraces both aspects of Metroid, because you have Metroid Fusion, and I would say to some extent Zero Mission. Those point you in a direction and say this is where you should go. And so Metroid Dread does that quite a bit, or really what it does is it slams doors behind you and only presents you one viable way forward. And in some regards, I actually really like the way it does that, because one of the things that happens a lot is that you actually do something that changes the environment. Mm-hmm. And so you'll like flip a switch that causes a reactor to go off, and suddenly the area is too hot for you to go back into without taking damage, until you get the ability to withstand high temperatures, that is. And then there are other times where you'll move or block, and that block will block off a certain path, so you can't do that a second time.
Yep.
So there was a lot of places where I really liked the fact that you actually had an effect on the environment, and that's a way that they use to herd you in certain directions. Now, I feel like they did that a little bit too much, because it's like I get a new power-up, and it's like, oh, wait, I know where I can use this. Oh, wait, I can't go back to that area for like another 2 hours because they're trying to herd me on this one path. But then there were parts of the game where, like, in the mid to late game, where you get a new power-up, and it's like, wait, I can go wherever I want. Why am I suddenly now allowed to go wherever I want? And so, your computer doesn't really tell you where to go. It's just like, okay, you have this new ability to explore. It's like, okay, so there were places where it did open up, and then it would like go back into a narrow thing. So it kind of switched between the two a lot.
I only found it annoying when I wanted to just clean up an area and try to get as many missile tanks as I could. Yeah. And I just run into one of those, you can't go here. And sometimes it felt like I'd be in an area like Berenia or whatever, mm-hmm. and it felt like there was left Berenia and right Berenia, and there were just things blocking you off from going between them. So it almost felt like, yeah, this is named one thing on the map, but it's really two different spots that I have to enter through different means, whether that's a teleporter or a train or whatever.
Yeah, and that is the thing, is that it does block you off, and it does when you want to go back and you want to do some cleanup, it is annoying. Most of your power up hunting is going to be in the second half of the game.
So do you think, like, before the final boss, if you just went back, have they opened up all those doors by then? Have you tried?
Yeah. So interesting thing is, if you backtrack after beating getting the ability to go to the final boss after you get all the power-ups, the teleporters actually are no longer color-coded. I mean, they have a color when you see them on the map, but you can just teleport from any teleporter to any other teleporter. So the game does open up.
Wow.
And they do.
I had no idea. That's cool. Well, I beat the final boss and then lent the game out, so I am looking forward to trying to go back and get everything later.
Yeah,
so
that would
be really handy.
Get everything for the record.
Cool. Did you have the amiibo?
Okay, maybe not everything.
So let me ask you this: since you didn't have the amiibo but you got everything, does it look like your E-tanks are full, or that there's room for one more?
Yeah, I'd say it looks like it. I suppose you could squeeze one more in there.
All right. I was just wondering, do people that didn't purchase the amiibo, is it making it clear in the UI that you're missing something?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Interesting. All right. Should we talk about the beautiful work that went into making this game pretty?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
All right. Well, speaking of extra things that you can buy, such as the amiibo, I did go all in and get the special edition, which comes with a massive art book. It's 100 pages, I think, with art from the 5 mainline games and a big emphasis on Metroid Dread, just tons of concept art and everything. Loved looking at that. Did you go for that edition?
No, I'm cheap.
Well, how did you enjoy the art in the game itself?
The game's visuals are really, really good. I think the environment design works really well. It doesn't get cluttered, but it's not bland and lifeless either. Yeah, so even though a lot of the areas are industrial, and many of the rooms stand out from one another, which is something that I think is very important in a game like this, is that you can look at a screenshot and go, oh, it's that room in the game.
I totally agree. Yeah, I love the design. I am so pleased to be playing an HD Metroid game. Is this our first one? It's our first one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is our first HD Metroid game, unless we want to include the Nintendo Land's Metroid themed.
Right. Yeah, man, it was a pleasure to see, and it was running at 60 frames per second.
Mm-hmm. So there are a few places where the frame rate dips, but
Simeon complains about the loading screens big time. He's like, this is worse than a Dreamcast game.
Yeah, the loading screens do take a while, and the frame rate does drop during the loading screens. But there are a few actual gameplay segments where the frames will drop, and it's mostly wide shots where they pan the camera so you can see a big building as you're walking into it. Mm-hmm. So it's places where you expect it to happen. There's no enemies or anything, so it's not affecting your ability to play the game. It's just they got a little overambitious.
I think they did a great job having it play in a 2D environment but mix in those 3D elements. I loved all the cinematics where you're countering and the camera shifts position. They actually take a lot of opportunities to move the perspective of the camera, whether you're shine sparking up or you're countering or
you're aiming the Omega beam to fight an E.M.M.I.
Right.
Yeah, and the thing is, the game actually looks good at those multiple angles, and that's a tricky thing to do, because typically when you have a game that has a very zoomed out perspective like that, you're only really considering that one straight on perspective.
I cannot wait to see Boundary Break, the YouTuber who takes control of games cameras and just explores. I know he's working on Metroid Dread, probably out by the time this podcast is.
Oh man, that's gonna be awesome. I'm really now I'm excited.
Yeah, just really great attention to detail, whether it's water effects or just a reflection of an explosion happening in the environment. I can't really complain at all about the visuals.
Yeah, and I would say the enemy designs and everything else look very, very consistent with Metroid style in the past. Which I'm not sure I would say was necessarily the case with Samus Returns, though that may just because everything was kind of low res in Samus Returns. In hindsight, Samus Returns was not the best looking game.
It wasn't. And I have just a feeling of relief overall with this game, Metroid Dread, coming out from the same developers as Samus Returns. I think we reviewed it well at the time. I don't know what we kind of landed on, maybe an 8-ish when we talked about Samus Returns. But I think Mercury Steam, the Spanish developer who made this, they stepped it up big time. And to create a AAA Nintendo game on an HD system and have it look this good represents a big leap from Samus Returns, in my opinion.
Yep.
All right.
But also, Samus's new design. What do you think of Samus's suit?
Samus's suit. I thought it was really interesting how they tied it into the story of Metroid Fusion. So you had some of that organic look that it said it was gradually being kind of repaired back to her original power suit. So I think it looked good. I always think it's interesting when one of her primary colors is blue. It's not what I think of when I think of Samus, but it was always fun getting each suit upgrade, and makes me wish that we could retroactively put those as options in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate.
Yeah, I like the design. It is kind of weird because I'm looking at it, I'm trying to figure out, okay, why does Samus looks like that? I did not know about the whole, like, the suit is sort of rebuilding itself to be the original, which makes sense if you know how Fusion ends. But yeah, okay, so that's interesting. Because they show, they do depict the Fusion suit in the intro cinematic. And it's like, okay, so this isn't just like they're retconning what the Fusion suit looks like. This is actually a different suit.
Yep.
But I think it looks good, and I think Samus's proportions and everything look really good on screen. And like just her posing, I like the way she poses after she saves, that very kind of confident stance. I really like that.
Yes. Yeah, she exudes a lot of confidence in all of the cinematics. By the way, it's fun when you actually get to control her arm cannon during cinematics. That feels so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess since this is kind of an aesthetic thing, the animation thing, I actually thought maybe she was a little too confident in the cinematics, because I don't want her to be Other M Samus, where she just kind of freaks out about everything. But I kind of was hoping that she'd be, I don't know, like maybe just step it down one notch to, something between Metroid Prime and what they had here, because in Metroid Prime, Samus gets into a fight, and by the end of it, she's panting. You can see she's exerted herself.
Yep.
And here they kind of undersell, like, once you beat a boss, you sort of like, here I am, and I have like 50 health left. And Samus is just acting like it's no big deal. And, maybe that's just because there's a time gap. Like, if I had to come up with an in-universe explanation, there's a time gap between the Prime games and Samus Returns. And maybe she's just gotten way better at her job. So she can be kind of cocky. Because she comes across as kind of cocky.
Yep. I mean, there's one of two modes. She's either strutting her stuff, or her eyes are the size of saucers and she's screaming her head off. But I think you bring up a good point. It would have been amazing if they had different kind of fatigue animations depending on the percentage of life left. That would be awesome.
Actually, that would have been a really nice touch. Whereas, like, you can kind of see her panting a little bit after a boss battle if you barely survived, like I did most of them. Or if you, like, just completely obliterated that thing, then Samus just is Samus just is completely calm and collected and
right.
very
Well, let's talk about the music. I'll just touch on it, and then you can correct me, because we all know I'm not the music expert. However, right as this game was coming out, there was a recent Switch update that allowed Bluetooth headphone compatibility. So I took full advantage of that and used a pair of Bluetooth headphones my entire playthrough, and that was so helpful, just getting into the setting and the feeling of isolation and enjoying the music too. I don't have the vocabulary to comment on specific tracks and whatnot, but I will say overall the soundtrack felt very Metroid Prime to me, and that's a huge compliment because it's very hard to outdo the Metroid Prime soundtrack. So felt like it was appropriate for a Metroid game, and they did a good job, and I definitely enjoyed playing with headphones.
Yeah, so I'm not a music expert either, but the thing I want, I've heard some people say that they don't like the music in this game, like it's not as good as the rest of the series. And the thing is, I remember when I was playing through it, I would not describe it as Metroid Prime. I would say it's very Metroid. It's very Super Metroid. And the thing is, like, and if you've ever listened, like, there are tons on YouTube right now. You can go listen to people like using the Super Metroid sound font and kind of making a demake of the music, and yeah, it sounds like Super Metroid music. Like, and I know the composer. I don't remember their name, and I haven't looked up what they've done in the past, but I know it was a Japanese composer, so probably someone who worked on past Metroid games. But yeah, it sounds very appropriate to Metroid. It's not like just a bunch of ambient noise. Like the music in Samus Returns, I don't think was all that, from what I recall, wasn't all that great. Wasn't all that memorable. But here, it's actual music. Like, there's a melody. It's very heavy. It's got mood. It's not just a bunch of kind of sci-fi humming, bunch of electronic noises that you would expect from a sci-fi game in the modern age. It's actually has that Metroid energy to it. So I would say that I was very impressed with the soundtrack. Now, admittedly, just due to the mixing and because we're not using, chip tunes are very punchy, and that's kind of why it's they stick in our minds so much. Mm-hmm. So with modern mixing and all that and the modern instrumentation, I think that because you don't have that sort of more harsher, more simplistic sounds, you don't quite, it kind of blends into the background a little bit more than other games. But yeah, it's 100% Metroid music.
Listen up, everybody. It is spoilers time. We are going to be talking about the story, and we're going to be talking about it all. So this game has a great story. If you haven't beat it, hit pause on the podcast and we'll be here for you when you're done. Glenn, it's Metroid 5 story time. What do you want to start out with?
Let's start right at the beginning. So, and this is going to be me pointing out something that's actually a little bit weird, is that there was an opening text crawl, and it was phrased from Samus's perspective.
Yep.
But it wasn't voiced.
Right.
What the heck? What? Why wasn't it voiced? Because Samus actually does. Before. Yeah, Samus has been voiced before, and she actually does speak. She doesn't speak English in this game. She speaks Chozo, but she actually does speak in the game. So it's not we don't want Samus to speak in this game. Right. We want her to be a silent protagonist. Well, you kind of fail just by having a first-person text scroll, because that implies that she's, not... I think that technically disqualifies you from being a silent protagonist. But then they have her speak Chozo at later points, and I don't know if it was just like... And then they have other characters, like Adam speaks.
Right.
And so I'm hearing that, and it's like, okay, this isn't like a saving money on localization issue, so why aren't... I don't know. That opening crawl was kind of a head tilter for me, but I actually really like the setup for this game because... It's not like your typical Metroid game where you start at your ship and you go deeper and deeper into the caves. You actually start... Samus... Okay, so for those... Well, if you're listening to this, presumably you've already played the game. But, Samus goes down into the tunnels, and they don't show how she gets all the way down there, but she goes underground, and then she gets trapped underground, and you're trying to get back to your ship the entire game. And I thought that was really interesting. Again, turning things on their head, sort of like with the Morph Ball. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, two things. One, Nintendo absolutely needs to get better in the voice department overall. It's 2021, almost 2022. We should not be having to read every line of text in almost all of their games. Two, I don't want to gloss over the part where Samus did speak, because that was an amazing moment. Her one line in the game is like, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," and spoken in Chozo. Man, that was pretty awesome.
I did like this game. It did have plenty of plot, but never felt overbearing. It wasn't Other M where you're like constantly watching a movie. It's just kind of like short little bursts here and there that kind of like, okay, this is what happens. So now and oftentimes they'll go from like a cutscene directly into like a boss battle or something, which is really cool.
Right. I like the mystery throughout the whole thing. Like, who is Ravenbeak and why did he spare you? And Adam's like trying to work out that mystery for you. And I also like how, similar to the gameplay, you might think this story is going to be about why did the Emmys turn on us and what's going on here. But really, as you play through, it becomes more about the Chozo and the dueling tribes. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just appreciate what they did with the bait and switch on this isn't really a game about Emmys in gameplay or story. It's about Samus and the Chozo. Yeah,
that was really nice. And I like how the story has an effect on the gameplay in places, because there's a point where one of the Chozo deactivates the Emmys, and then you can just you just start blazing through those areas very quickly, and you get pretty far into the game, and you can go through the Emmy areas, and it feels really nice. And then the Emmys get reactivated after a point, but so it's nice to see how the story and all that kind of play. They actually were willing to let you just have a segment where you could just kind of relax as part of the story, even though you knew it wasn't going to last forever.
Well, let's talk about Metroid tropes, because this is a series that, even though it has a continual storyline, there are definitely some elements that repeat themselves. Like Ridley, for example, showing up and being defeated in so many different games. This game starts out by telling you, hey, this is the history of the Metroid. Mm-hmm. They're extinct. Wink, wink. This is the history of the X. They're extinct. Wink, wink. And as a player, you're like, well, obviously these elements are still relevant, or we wouldn't be recapping them. So I came into it fully expecting we're going to see Metroids, we're going to see X. And I'm impressed with this team's restraint, because they reused Kraid, but that's the only returning boss battle from the whole series. And we go an entire Metroid game without seeing your typical Metroid, let's say.
Yeah, you go the entire game and you don't see a Metroid. Well, I mean, so the Metroid series is a little weird because they kind of tried to rebrand it in Fusion by making Metroid mean Ultimate Warrior. Mm-hmm. And even some of Nintendo's promotional material referred to Samus as the Ultimate Warrior. So the implication here is that Samus is now the Metroid.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. By title.
Yeah, I do appreciate the restraint. There was no obligatory Ridley fight. And I guess, to be fair, they did that in Samus Returns because Ridley's the final boss in that game, and honestly, I felt like that was kind of indulgent. A lot of people are like, no, I liked it. It was the best boss in the game. And it's like, yeah, but it kind of diminishes his return in Super Metroid. Because at that point, it's like, okay, why would Samus leave the Metroid alone if she knew Ridley could regenerate and follow her? And I don't know.
Yeah.
She would know that Ridley can regenerate from the Prime games, because two of the Prime games feature Ridley. I don't know. I don't understand it. It's as the YouTuber The Orpheon referred to it. It's all bird magic.
Yes. Well, should we talk about the ending?
So something before we talk about the ending, something I want to really just praise the game is that there are a lot of nice callbacks. And so a lot of the events of the games are very, very logical feeling. So it's like, okay, the Ravenbeak wants to use the Metroids as weapons, right? And so he goes to SR388 to capture some Metroids, but they're all gone. Samus killed them all, so he's frustrated. But then that leads his minions to getting infected by the X. And like, it's that, I look at it as like, that's actually a really logical sequence of events. If you're a longtime fan, that actually, that actually feels like a kind of a payoff for two different games in the series.
Mm-hmm.
So there's stuff like that that I really like, and I also just as an aside, I really like the moment in the game where you realize that so there's this point in the game where you go to this one area that's like really small on the map, like it shows because you have the bigger map and it shows you kind of a rough outline of what the areas look like, and then there's like what was it, like Eris or something?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this little area on the map, and I remember looking at that, and it's like, okay, some stuff's going to go down there. The little area on the map is always where the bad thing that changes the pace of the story, changes the tone of the story. That's always where it happens, is the little place. Because it's like, okay, we're just doing this. Only exists so that we can have a gut punch in the game, and. You find out that it's actually a quarantine area to contain the X parasites and things that are infected by the X. And then as you're leaving the area, there's this one shot where Samus is, as she's watching, she sort of just kind of drops her shoulders and looks around, and you can see the X flying out. It's just like, what have I done?
Yep. Well, I'm a big fan of plot twists, so let's get to the point where Samus starts to question Adam's motives, because Adam starts to sound less and less like Adam, and she charges up her blaster, shoots the place that we've all known as like a safe spot where we can save our game and stuff, destroys it, and reveals Ravenbeak. Basically, Ravenbeak has discovered that the Metroid DNA from the vaccine that Samus had has actually turned her into a Metroid, allowing her to suck the life out of things that she touches. And of course, he wants to use her, his daughter, to rule the galaxy.
Yeah,
kind of Star Wars-like.
For the record, the daughter thing is kind of metaphorical. So Samus has been infused, and I think this was revealed in previous material, but Samus has been infused with Chozo DNA, and some of that DNA came from him, apparently. Yeah. So it's not like Samus actually was hatched from an egg or something, or however Chozo were born.
She has human parents.
Yeah, Ridley killed them, but
yes, but because of the DNA, I guess he feels like he has some right to her, some ownership over her. I guess he's a pretty bad dude. Samus doesn't like that at all, so they have a big fight, and I enjoyed this fight all around. I enjoyed its story implications, its gameplay mechanics and patterns as a boss battle, and especially the cinematics. Yeah. They went all out, making that feel like an epic final boss battle.
I appreciate the fact that he fights with an arm cannon.
Yes,
because that's a nice little, and it's a really obvious little thing, but it's a nice little thing where. You can point at that and say, oh, okay, yeah, that's just a Chozo thing. That's not a Samus thing. That's a Chozo thing.
Mm-hmm. At least whatever his tribe was. What were they called?
The Makin.
Makin, yes. My favorite part was probably when he ripped his own wing off. That was pretty hardcore.
Yeah, it did raise some questions about, okay, do Chozo just normally have wings? Is that like biomechanical thing? I think he was just like ripping a part of his body off. I don't know. I have questions, but
he was looking like Sephiroth there for a minute.
Yeah, but yeah, that was a great fight, and the way it ends with Samus like trying to use her Metroid powers, and then she like grabs his face, and there's like a good 20 seconds of just hearing him scream in agony as Samus leeches him dry. And man, it sounds gratuitous if you haven't seen it. Let me tell you, it is the most satisfying thing in the world.
Yes.
Like, it's just, you're loving every second of it. It's just like, yeah, die, you blackguard.
How long were you trying to beat that boss?
I think it took me about 4 tries.
Okay. That sounds
it didn't. it wasn't super difficult. It took me like 2 tries to get through the first phase, 1 try to get through. Yeah, like 2 deaths on the first phase, 1 death on the second phase, and then the third phase was kind of a repeat of the first phase with just a little extra added, and so that one wasn't too hard.
Yep. Well, we eventually do beat the boss and get a really cool new suit. There's the signature Metroid ending sequence where things are going to blow up. And it is sad to see another planet blow up. I was thinking of, what if the Metroid 5 game saga had a subtitle? It'd be like Samus and the 5 exploding planets or something. Cause
how many planets has she destroyed so far? Because there's Zebes. I think it's Zebes.
That sounds right.
Zebes. She did blow up SR388 in Metroid Fusion. Do we count the BSL in that case?
I guess not.
Because she blew up both of those at the same time.
I mean, it had biomes and creatures, so yes.
I mean, it's not a planet. It is. Yeah. I don't know. So
it's a habitat.
So if we're just going off planets, Zebes, SR388, and ZDR. Has she blown up any of the planets in the Prime games? Because I think it's only been 3 planets, if we're actually talking planets.
I'll have to play the Prime games again, but hopefully Nintendo will re-release those.
Yeah, I don't think she blew up any planets in the Prime games. Well, okay, maybe the Phazon planet? She may have destroyed the Phazon homeworld.
Oh yeah, I bet she did.
Okay, so we'll say 4. So that's
and that was called Phase.
Yeah, Phase. Blowing up planets is not a phase, Mom. This is who I am. I destroy planets.
Her mom's dead, though. Remember?
Right.
She'd be saying that to Adam.
No, that just makes it funnier.
So the ending sequence,
like computer Adam or like human Adam?
Good question. And speaking of Adam, do you think there was any point in Metroid Dread where she was actually speaking to the real Adam?
You know, I hadn't considered that possibility until this podcast, that she wasn't speaking to computer Adam.
It must have been in the ship.
Yeah, well, definitely in the ship. And I like how Adam starts the game off saying, "Why are you doing this? You're not getting paid for it. You're not getting paid enough for this." And also at the end, it's a really nice touch when she's like gone full Metroid and she's about to touch the controls and Adam says, No, don't do that. You're going to drain the ship's power.
Oh, that was Adam? I thought that was the X.
No, that was Adam because it was in English.
Okay, and then the X.
Yeah, I didn't understand that ending with the X mimicking a Chozo and then like being helpful to Samus.
So the X embodies the dead Chozo in order to speak and communicate, I think. But the question is why the X had a change of heart to be willing to counteract her Metroid abilities and allow her to escape.
Yeah,
because X have never cooperated with Samus before.
What was that guy called? Quiet Robe or something?
Quiet Robe, yep.
Yeah. It doesn't really... Yeah, they don't really explain that. I guess bird magic?
It's obviously supposed to harken back to the baby. Like an enemy race cooperating with Samus for the greater good. But the motivations of the X are unclear, I think.
Well, I saw that as like the Quiet Robe was like, even though he had been absorbed by the X, like he still, some aspect of him was like either still present, like spiritually, or he was, the X had taken on some aspect of his compassion or something.
Yeah, I suppose that's possible. Well, I think we're going to wind it down here. It's been a wild ride with some closing thoughts. I want to know, like, what our impressions of Metroid Dread are as a whole and in relation to the series. And then if we could just touch on like where we want the series to go from here. But first, how would you encapsulate your Metroid Dread experience?
There This is the best game in the series and my favorite game for the Nintendo Switch. Like, hands down, my favorite game for the Nintendo Switch. But,
wow.
And very easily, or at least favorite game so far, and very easily the best Metroid game in the series. That said, do not start with this one. Because I really think that a huge part of my enjoyment of this was getting to see a ton of payoff for past story beats, you know, with like eliminating the Metroids and the X parasites and all of that. This is definitely like the culmination of a story arc. And so I would say I would play the rest of the series first, if you can play the rest of the series first, or at least most of the series, you know, at least get a few games in the series before going to this one, because to maximize your enjoyment of it.
I'm actually right there with you, Glenn. This is my new favorite game. My favorite,
like, just favorite game of all time.
I think so, because what I've kind of held in that place through my many years of Nintendo fandom has just been my experience with Metroid Prime. I have such fond memories of that tone, that environment, that soundtrack, those boss battles, feeling like Samus. And I think Metroid Dread dials all of that up. So I really enjoyed myself. I got to play through the game rather quickly. Like I said, I got all of the kind of extracurricular amiibo and collectible stuff. I even got a pin set from GameStop. Just, it's the most fun I've had with a video game in a long time. And I think it's super rewarding as a longtime Nintendo fan, like I said, following the rumors and holding out hope that Metroid Dread was an actual thing. And then getting to actually play it and getting to be blown away by how good it is. It's also really rewarding as a Metroid fan because they didn't skimp on the story. Like, there's very significant things that happen in this game, along with great presentation and graphics and even an entire voice acted line from Samus. So yeah, I kind of took off my critic hat, even though I was able to, you know, point out a few things that I would change, like the map toggle and whatnot.
Yeah, like the map, and like something I didn't get to mention is, like, I think some of the Shine Spark puzzles are a little bit cryptic. Like, there's a few, like half of them I had to look up because the game doesn't really tell you what you can do with the Shine Spark, and there's some like really fiddly maneuvers that you have to do to get all of the items.
Yep.
Like, there's apparently you can activate a Shine Spark in midair if you do a somersault, then fire your gun and immediately press the jump button afterward. And it's like, there's no way I would have figured that one out on my own. So there are a few places where it's cryptic, you know, not like, I know that's been like this big hot button issues. This is some God of War developer said, the game's bad because they're you know, some of the critical paths you have to blow up walls to find. And it's like, yeah, you get, I remember early on, there was an area where I got like turned around for like maybe 10 minutes. But, you know, I was just like, okay, shoot everything now, I guess.
Yeah. If there's never any progression resistance, it wouldn't feel very rewarding to get to new areas. So, yeah, I kind of partway through the game, I had the thought I could be playing my new favorite game of all time, and I just started like taking it in and focusing on how much I was enjoying it, and it only got better from there. Like, the entire second half of the game really leans into all of its strengths and surprises the player a lot. So I think it's number one.
Yeah, I would not say it's my favorite game of all time. But yeah, it very easily could be. I don't know. For games like this, I kind of have to step back and wait like a year to see how my opinion develops. Like, you know, I think I said Paper Mario the Origami King, if I had to give it a rating, I would have given it a like it a lot. And now I've had some time away from it. It's like, nah, I'd probably bump that down to a like it.
Yeah.
You know? But, yeah, this very easily could be a top 10 for me.
It's just so great to see Nintendo doing well, and they just put out a statement that the Switch is halfway through its lifetime, and we're at almost 5 years, right? March will be 5 years.
Yeah, it will be. Gosh.
So the fact that they have a console that's performing so well and that their developers are knocking it out of the park repeatedly with Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Metroid Dread, just all of these seminal installations and long-running series. It's a very exciting time to be a Nintendo fan. So
yeah, and I'll say this as someone, I've actually been a little bit more like, the Switch is not bad, but a lot of the big games that everybody goes gaga about, I've been kind of lukewarm on. Well, not lukewarm. Like, Mario Odyssey is a very good game, but I have issues with the way its progression is designed. Breath of the Wild is a very good game. I have issues with the way its progression is designed. And, I was thinking, okay, the Switch is going to be that thing where it was great for everyone but me, and it was just really good for me. The games were good, but they felt like a mile wide and like only a few feet deep. And no, like it's like, oh, but when it like leans on the strengths of the previous games in the series, then you have there are definitely this definitely is making me reconsider that, oh, maybe that isn't just this generation, that's just going to be like the Mario and the Zeldas of this generation.
Well, maybe I should hold off from saying it's my favorite game of all time and my favorite Metroid game until I actually play all of them in the series. I still need to do the original Metroid 2 on Game Boy, so that could dethrone this. Just kidding.
No, of course it's not. Trust me, it's not. Remember when I said that I was happy that the music wasn't a bunch of atmospheric sci-fi noises? That's the entire soundtrack from Metroid 2, except for I guess the ending theme and the main tunnel theme. The main tunnel theme is like the only actual music in the game. Which is why I was ticked off in Samus Returns that they only like used a very mellow arrangement of that for like the first 10 minutes of the game, and then like the actual main tunnel for the rest of the game was just this kind of very ambient, dark sort of atmospheric piece. So yeah, definitely have stepped up their game since Samus Returns.
My last question for you is, besides the obvious of what we're all asking for...
Yes, it's worth $60.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was another controversy. I thought that's where you were going with this. It's like, oh, it's a 2D game, so it's not worth $60. Shut up!
Thank you. That needed to be said. Besides, of course, what we're all asking for, Metroid Prime Trilogy to come back in an easily accessible way. What do you hope the next new game in the Metroid series is like?
Like just in general, or for next 2D Metroid game?
If you had to make the decision for Nintendo where to allocate their next resources for Metroid in general, how would you want it to be spent?
So, this may get me in a lot of hot water, but take the gameplay from Other M and try to refine that and make a proper third-person 3D Metroid game. That's what honestly, after this game, like, I'm not sure how you follow this up. Like, I think, as much as it pains me to say this, I feel like it needs to be like a good 5-6 years before we see another 2D Metroid game. We need just some time to kind of cool our jets after this one, like, because this is going to be a very hard act to follow. So I think Nintendo, well, I mean, Metroid Prime 4 is going to come out, and that's going to be a change in direction. So Metroid Prime. So obviously, the next thing to do is Metroid Prime 4. Yep. But like the next game in the series, I would like to see them try to do another third person. Because honestly, I thought the 3D, the idea of a 3D third person Metroid game made a lot of sense. And it's like, yeah, if you were to do a Metroid game in the N64 era, this is probably what it would look like. And I would like, and it kills me that Metroid Other M wasn't a very good game in many regards, because I think like the core gameplay was really if they hadn't constrained missiles to like first person, and they hadn't done all, like, if you take out all of the weird decisions, you actually have a very strong foundation there. And so it saddens me that the rest of the game just wasn't up to snuff, because basically it's guilt by association. Nintendo's probably not going to do that again, because everyone didn't like the story, and they didn't like a few odd decisions about how the game controlled.
Right. I'm with you. I'll piggyback on that one. I actually appreciated so much Metroid Other M's emphasis on storytelling with the animation. It was the most Nintendo has ever invested in voice acting, in cinematics, and it would have been incredible if not for the writing missteps. So just make sure you get the writing right. But I think because of that game's poor reception by the general audiences, Nintendo has stepped back from voice acting and bringing characters to life like they attempted to do in Metroid Other M. So I'd love to see it again. Just needed better writing and a better characterization of Samus.
Well, and honestly, I think if they were to do a third-person Metroid game, third-person 3D Metroid game, they would need to... I would scale back the amount of story. I would do it to something more akin to what Dread did. Maybe just a little bit more if you really wanted to have more story. But I think Other M... I think there was a little bit... It was a little intrusive. Whatever the word is. It was a little too much. They laid it on too thick.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's Metroid Dread. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We went over a little long, but I think you could tell that Glenn and I were both very excited about this one. So I hope you are too. Just please leave a comment and let us know what you thought about Metroid Dread. We will respond, we'll interact with you, and thankful for our listeners overall. Okay, let's plug a few things like you have been throughout the whole episode, Glenn. You can follow us at 2Button Crew everywhere on social media. Actually, I don't know. We deleted our Snapchat and stuff, but I guess I should plug specifically Twitter and Facebook. And you spell out the 2, TWO, Button Crew. We have a blog with great articles. Even though we don't write them as often anymore by a long shot, we did always try to make our topics evergreen so that you could go back and read them at any time. So that is at our website, 2buttoncrew.com.
And lastly, if you have any topics that you would like to hear us discuss, maybe it's an old classic game that you like that we haven't talked about yet, or maybe it's something, a more general topic about gaming at large, like some topics we've done in the past, or how to reduce your backlog. We did one on trailers and reveals, I think, a long time ago. So if you want to, just have anything that you think would make a good discussion, email me at glen@twobuttoncrew.com. And of course, spell out TWO and all that. And if there's enough of discussion to be had there, then we'll make an episode on it.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks for being a part of the crew. Bye.
Bye.